Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. This is Rick Hackett staff. We will now begin the presentation.
Bienvenidos, gracias por acompañarnos esta noche. Este es un evento con interpretación. Por favor, vaya a la parte inferior de su pantalla de Zoom a la barra de menú y presione en el globo para seleccionar el idioma que prefiere para escuchar esta información. Debe seleccionar español o inglés. Seleccione cualquiera. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. This is an interpreted event. Please go to the bottom of your Zoom screen to your menu bar and press on the globe to select the language you prefer to listen to for this information. You need to select either English or Spanish. Please select your preference. Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Gary Sanfasan. I'm the recovery manager for Boulder County. It's great to be with all of you this evening. These are some of the guidelines we urge you to consider for meetings where we'll use an interpreter. We want you to speak slowly and don't interrupt the speaker. We'll be having opportunities tonight for folks to ask questions, to participate in polling. We want to maximize the opportunity for you to have input. Next slide, please. So welcome. This is a meeting for Unincorporated Boulder County. We are going to jump into the marshal fire rebuilding approach. Hannah Hipley is going to share that. Some draft ideas that the planning department has come up with. I want to thank residents who participated in the survey that was sent out earlier this week. That was very helpful to gather that input. I also want to welcome the county commissioners who are in attendance, Commissioner Marta Lochemin, Commissioner Claire Levy, and Commissioner Matt Jones. Appreciate their time. I know they're eager to listen and understand your ideas and needs and feedback. We're going to have Ron Flax, who's the chief building official, talk about the building code and Build Smart, and Zach Swank, who's with the Office of Sustainability, Climate Action and Resilience, share some of the resources to help build high performance homes. And Cami Edson, who's a transportation planner, talk about some transportation resources. And we'll go over some next steps and provide at the end a general forum for questions and answers. One thing I want to urge everyone is to consider asking general questions in this forum. Try to hold back from going into too much detail about your specific situation or property. Although that's important, tonight's really about general concepts. And I would ask my colleagues to put the email address for in the chat for specific questions about your property, Marshall Rebuilding at bouldercounty.org, where we can answer your specific questions at a later time. Finally, I just want to reiterate this. We've had some instances in past meetings where some participants have felt the need to advertise their services. And this is not the place and time for that. This is a neutral meeting where we are really attempting to share information with fire survivors and their architects and builders and get their input. And so we would ask you to refrain to advertise your services. There's other venues for that. There's a building expo Friday and Saturday. You are welcome to attend. If you do post your services, we will remove you from the meeting. I guess, and then just lastly, before I hand it off, I want to celebrate a big win today. And this meeting is about rebuilding, but I can't help myself to just celebrate the news that all three communities are going to support the cost of foundation removal. I hope that relieves a lot of anxiety from your shoulders to know that that will be covered in the debris removal program. We will be hosting a informational session on the whole debris removal program next Tuesday at 6 o'clock on March 1st, and we'll be sending out more information and links and how to participate in that, and that'll be recorded just like this meeting is. So again, that's exciting news, but now it's time to jump into the Marshall rebuilding approach. And thank you again all for coming. And I want to hand it over to Hannah Hipley in the planning department. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Good evening, everyone. My name is Hannah Hipley, and I am the Long Range Planning Manager at Boulder County's Community Planning and Permitting. Just want to thank you all for spending your Wednesday evening with us to help us draft these regulations. The intent of this is to develop an approach to rebuilding following the Marshall Fire. In the format going forward for this section of the meeting tonight is that I will share information with you. Afterwards, in some cases, we have poll questions for you. We will pause to collect your feedback, questions, suggestions, and concerns. Although we're using Zoom, my hope is that it can be and will be an exchange. If you're not comfortable sharing here in this meeting in any way, there are other ways that you can reach out to us and provide input. But what we hear tonight will assist us in creating an approach to rebuilding that we hope works for those of you impacted by the Marshall Fire. So we just wanted to take a moment and learn a little bit about who's in the meeting with us tonight. So our first two questions are about who you are. So the first question is popped up on the screen. So who is in attendance tonight? And so which of these answers best represents you?
And this is Rick Hackett staff. We'll give just another few seconds to let a few more folks participate. We know we have some people who are not homeowners in the area, but we'll get a good number and then we can launch the poll results in a few seconds here. And the poll results should be on the screen now, Hannah.
They are. I presume everyone in the meeting can see these results. Okay, so we have a lot of folks whose home were destroyed, and a variety of the other categories as well. Thank you. So if you fall into being a resident of the area, the next question is, where do you or did you live?
So there was a question in the chat about where to enter the poll data. So just take your clicker and click on one of the circles next to the area names. Move your cursor over there.
Thanks, Gary. This is Rick Hackett, staff again. The polls may not be available if you're on a older version of Zoom application. So if you don't see the option to vote in a poll, you can type your answers in the chat if you're having problems. And it looks like most folks are responded, I think, to this one. So give it a few more seconds and then I'll share the results.
Again, thank you. It looks like we have some good representation from around the Fern area. Thanks everyone for participating. Can we go to the next slide? So you may have heard us, talking about Article 19, but I just wanted to take a moment here and really explain what that means. Article 19 is really a chapter in the Boulder County Land Use Code where we are able to establish new procedures following disasters. So it's a shortcut we use as staff, but really what we are hoping to do is use this section of the code to create a tailored approach for rebuilding after the Marshall Fire. We can go to the next slide. So specific Marshall Fire rebuilding approach is one which allows us to adjust timeframes, create a streamlined process in order to be fast and flexible in rebuilding. It allows us to address disaster-specific issues related to rebuilding after the fire, particularly related to the type of review that is required or could have been necessary. For instance, site plan review is not required when you're rebuilding the same home using the same footprint and the same height and size. The Marshall Fire rebuilding approach would allow changes to proceed without needing site plan review. And we're hoping tonight to get input from you about what those parameters around changes should be allowed under this streamlined process. We also want to note that we understand that rebuilding can take a lot of time, especially in events of this magnitude. We know that the timeframes in the code put pressure and add stress to people. And Article 19's intent is also to extend these timeframes to relieve some of that pressure and allow you to rebuild under this streamlined process instead of site plan review. Next slide, please. To explain this a slightly different way, the current code has two paths towards rebuilding. As I mentioned, one of them is rebuilding the same structure, and it has some parameters that go along with that, including a time frame to commence within a year. For structures that might have been in a setback because they're, predate the land use code or any regulations and are non-conforming, restoration of those structures and uses is to commence within 6 months. There are some benefits in that this is a fast process. If you're rebuilding the same thing, you go straight to a building permit. However, it doesn't provide a lot of flexibility, really none, and the timeframes are short. The other path that exists is the site plan review path, and the normal planning review processes, obtaining a variance for setback encroachments and those sorts of things. In this instance, or under this path that exists, there's a lot of flexibility, and there is not a time constraint, but the land use processes can take time. So the Marshall rebuilding approach tries to do, or hopes to create, is a third path that allows us to pull the best things from both of these existing paths into a set of regulations that will, again, allow us to adjust the timeframes, create a streamlined process, and address disaster-specific issues such as site cleanup, temporary housing, and resiliency issues. These next slides start diving into each of these issues in more detail. So we're going to start with site cleanup. And the Marshall Fire rebuilding approach is intended to clarify what site cleanup requirements are for this disaster. Again, these are tailored regulations intended to reflect this specific event. No two disasters are the same, and this will help us clarify what's needed for this particular event. And we know this is necessary for some basic health and safety reasons. The lots just really can't sit as they are for extended timeframes. And rebuilding on lots can take years in some cases. And in the meantime, those properties may have dirt or slopes that need stabilized so that they are safe. And the intent is really to ensure that a clean and safe place is again established for folks who remain living in the burn area and for those when they move home. We think the elements of this deconstruction and site cleanup would address what cleanup means. So for example, is it foundation removal? Is it the removal of dead vegetation? Is it the removal of contaminated soil? It would also explain what post-cleanup conditions of a property might be. So do we have erosion control measures in place to prevent stormwater runoff to adjacent properties, for example? And what does that look like? If foundation holes do remain, how do we ensure that that's a safe condition? And then this also would clarify, oh, I'm sorry, I skipped the timeframes. There is a time frame component, again, because we don't want this situation that's out there that we know is hazardous to remain in it for an undetermined amount of time. Again, setting expectations for the community and things that they can rely on, a time frame that you all can rely on for cleanup to happen in your neighborhood. And then it does clarify that there's a permit and inspection process that will go along with this. So here we do have a pause for questions. So I believe we were going to have folks raise their hand, or if you have comments, if you don't want to raise your hand, then
Okay, that's been corrected. Anna, go ahead.
thank you. So at this point in time is an opportunity for folks to raise their hands and make comments. If you have any suggestions, we just wanted to pause here and collect input. It's also possible to put those comments in the chat at this time. I'm not sure that I can see all the hands.
So Hannah, here's a question. Do you, I'm sorry, do you have the policy established for what is required for cleanup? And is it published anywhere with work steps and conditions for permits and inspection?
We do not have that established for the Marshall Fire rebuilding section of Article 19 at this point in time. I do believe we are issuing permits for cleanup in the building division has some requirements that are available for people to review.
Yeah, I would say that if you opt in to the coordinated debris program, cleanup program, then those requirements will meet the Article 19 requirements. It's really, we're looking at if people do not opt in for the coordinated program, so they understand what the expectations are.
So I am reading the chat. Someone asked if could construction fencing be sufficient to protect a basement hole from fall hazards. Those are exactly the kinds of things that we're thinking about. That is the approach we took in the Calwood fire to require fencing to be around a foundation hole.
I have a question. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Veronica.
This is regarding the soil removal and landscape removal, as far as who will make the decision about how much needs to go and how much of the landscaping would need to go. We have an extensive garden, and I'm hoping we have 2 acres, so I'm hoping the whole lot doesn't need to go, but just in general, to keep it to the general, is how is the decision making going to be made around what is removed and what is not removed?
That's a great question. I don't think we would anticipate you having to scrape the soil off your entire property, but the areas where maybe a structure where it was destroyed and the ash is sitting on the ground, that perimeter, as far as how deep of a soil removal needs to take place, that is something I think we would talk to our public health experts about. I don't have the answer to that question right now.
Yes, hi, this is Ron Flex. I'm the chief building official for the county. With the current site cleanup permits that we're issuing, there's essentially 2 pathways in terms of figuring out what needs to be cleaned up. We are focusing on the area of what we're calling the ash footprint. So it's the portion of the site where we have the byproducts and debris from the structures that were on the site. And we've sort of laid out 2 pathways. One is involving you remove some soil, and then there's a testing protocol that we've worked through with both the Boulder County Public Health as well as the state public health officials. So you would remove soil and essentially keep removing soil until the site tests clean. There's also a pathway by which you can remove 12 inches of soil, in which case at that point it would be deemed to comply. There's a fair bit of detail in that process, and we have that sort of laid out, and we can make sure to get that in the hands of anyone who's interested. But we have no interest in having anyone remove any more material from these sites than is necessary.
Yes, I just want to reiterate that the coordinated debris removal program, the county program, will adhere to these cleanup rules. One of the things we want to make sure, like Hannah indicated, is that people who are doing their own site cleanup, who opt out of the coordinated program, know the regulations, and they're posted now on the website, but also have a expected timeline when they will complete the cleanup. We don't want this hazard material being left out for a long period of time. So that will be included, that time frame, in the Article 19 regulations.
Gary, to add to that, I think the timeframes that go into the Article 19 regulations would be sure to be coordinated with the debris removal program. The intent would be to align these set of regulations with what they're doing for sure.
Hey, this is a question for Ron. He just mentioned that there were going to be standards for, we've actually gotten a couple building permits approved already. It's great. The building permit has a qualification in there that we have to pass this EPA 6020 test to some minimal standard, but the minimal standard is not specified in there. And I'm hoping I can get an answer as to what that is, because I think that's the quantitative, the site is clean that we're going for.
Phil, maybe if you can put your contact information in the chat, we can get into that detailed conversation.
Certainly.
Directly with you. Thank you.
Great. I suggest we move on, Hannah, to the next section. And I think some of these questions will be answered in your upcoming sections. Thanks.
Okay, so we did hit on this a little bit earlier, but I do want to take some time to dive in a little bit. The approach that we're creating for Marshall Fire rebuilding, again, is intended to relieve the pressure that the code currently has in the timelines. In the past, the path that we created allowed 3 years for folks to rebuild after the event. And that 3 years extended the time frame by 2 years for most people, because the exemption from site plan review for a destroyed structure only provides 1 year. For those with non-conforming structures or uses, again, where we might have a historical setback encroachment or something like that, this 3 years extends the time frame by 2.5 years for those non-conformities. Now, we do normally include a sunset date for these types of regulations, as they're temporary measures really intended to assist folks who are impacted by the fire to get home through an expedited process. We do know the rebuilding, the construction situation out there right now is different than it has been. And so these timeframes that we're used to, that we've used in the past 3 years, might not really work for folks today. And so we do want to ask again, through the poll, how much time you think you will need to rebuild. Yes, and when this question popped up, it reminded me, we do know at this point in time that you may not know the answers to many of these questions, and that's okay. This is very early on. We are doing our best at this time to draft a set of regulations that we think will work for folks. So if you don't know, that's okay. The question, I saw this in the chat, thank you. The question that we're asking, I think, is how much time do you think it will be until you're able to maybe apply for your building permit? Okay. And again, we just wanted to pause here to see if folks had any comments on the timing. Again, you could raise your hand or put comments in the chat.
Does anybody have any comment they'd like to make or unmute?
I'll ask my question instead of typing it in. And it's mostly just, are there thoughts or going to be provisions for a year, 2 years from now, when it becomes clearer how long it's going to take to rebuild, to changing the guidelines that are going to be established now? I would just think it would be a good idea to have some sort of a checkpoint to say, okay, it's not 3 years, it's going to be more like 4 or 5 across the board.
So an opportunity in the future to come back and look at these Article 19 regulations or in the timeframes that were established to see if they're really realistic in the time that's given.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of.
That's a good idea.
And I also see in the chat that there's a theme here that it's hard to tell right now because there are a number of things that are outside of people's control, like when their debris will be removed, when the Article 19 regulations will be adopted and ready for approval. And so there's just a number of things that's hard to predict the theme, as well as insurance settlements. And we would just want to recognize that those are all valid. And so I think it's incumbent on us to help provide that time frame to allow for those types of unknowns.
Great. I think we can probably move on to the next topic. We get to the next slide. So temporary housing while rebuilding. So temporary emergency housing is something that can be permitted by the chief building official. The purpose of addressing this in the Marshall Fire rebuilding approach is that it would help us clarify a couple of items. Sort of what types of structures or what things can be used for temporary housing could be addressed in this section. Any temporary housing we would want to ensure is safe housing. So for example, making sure there are the required utility connections, such as to a septic system, and when this temporary housing would be converted to a permanent situation. So again, here we have some poll questions to see how you feel about temporary housing.
Rick, what are the results looking like? Very good.
Okay. Thank you, that's helpful. The next question we have is about what types of things you think should be allowed to be used as temporary housing. I think perhaps we should have included a all of the above option here. Seems like there's general support for all types of housing. Thank you. If you do think RV should be allowed, what do you think is the appropriate length of time to allow RV living? Someone asked the question if the answer was supposed to be in days or years. This is a free form answer. You can type it in however you like.
And Hannah, this is Rick Hackett staff, giving folks just a few more seconds since this is a type your answer sort of question. So just watching it for a few more seconds here.
Okay. Thanks.
And it looks like we've got most of our answers, so I'll share the poll results now.
Oh. That doesn't show us folks' answers.
Yeah, this is Rick Hackett staff. This is a long list of answers. Staff obviously use these, but there's a big range here, ranging from 0 days to as long as needed, to 3 years, 1 year, 1 year maximum, the full Article 19 time span, indefinitely 18 months until the house is rebuilt. As long as it takes to build their home, as long as they're actively engaged in rebuilding, up to the duration to build back, in part to provide security for materials to be safely stored to prevent theft, until the certificate of occupancy is received. So I will try to throw these in the chat so everyone can see. That's kind of a rundown of what the different answers we had were.
Thanks for summarizing that. But I think what we can take away is that there was one, I think, that said an unlimited amount of time, but putting some parameter around this makes sense. We do have a pause for comment on this topic again. So comments, like as we have been doing, can go in the chat where everyone can see them, or if you want to raise your hand and make comment, we can take it that way as well. Okay, seeing none, I think we can move to the next topic, which is to address the fact that an ongoing wildfire risk continues to exist in our community. And as we rebuild in the Marshall Fire area and build in other parts of Boulder County, building in a way that reflects this existing condition is something that we should pursue. The proposal is to include a global code change to address wildfire hazards because Article 19, this process that we're working on right now is sort of out in front of a building code update. They would be included here to be followed shortly by a generalized building code update that would apply countywide. The standard sort of methods we have for trying to mitigate the risks of wildfire include using ignition resistant construction, installing a non-combustible perimeter, creating defensible space. So again, we'll pause here to take comment. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands or no comments in the chat, so we can move on to the next topic.
And Hannah, this is Rick Hackett staff again. I'm allowing folks to talk if they raise their hand, so you should be able to unmute yourself. If you do have a question, just please give us your name when you ask your question. So go ahead, Hannah.
I had raised my hand. This is Stephen Lichty, and those 4 bullets all look good, but they're very vague. And we need better definition on what that is, what it looks like, what it costs.
Thank you, Stephen. Those are good points. Anna, can you go back to one slide? Is there any other comments? Thank you. Any other comments people have want to raise their hand about?
I raised my hand already, and I already had the opportunity to unmute, so I'm going to. It's Phil Bosley. I think these are great things for houses in general. My concern with this is twofold. In our construction of our barn in 2016, we're actually prevented by the county from using some ignition resistant construction techniques due to energy efficiency guidelines that were being imposed on us. I would like to see that change so that we can use, say, aluminum frame windows instead of vinyl or wood, things like that, to at least allow some of the ignition resistant construction techniques to be used down in this area. I'm not a huge fan of imposing them as a requirement, although I think with everyone here, I also don't want to see my house burn down again.
Thank you, Phil. Does anyone else want to make a comment? Have a hand up? Unmute?
Yes.
Go ahead.
We can talk about all the mitigation, steps we can take. I'm curious about what we took in terms of the initial response to the fire. Who was the initial 2 brush trucks to the shed? What responding fire department was that?
Yeah, I'm sorry, sir. I don't have that information, but I'll put my name in the chat, my email contact, and I'd ask you to contact me after this meeting, and we can do
And
some
the reason I ask it is because 2 brush trucks were sent. And yet they were asked, there was one of the news stations that had the transmission when they had knocked it down. They were asked, do you want us to send additional units, which would have been the full-size pumper trucks? And they said, no, we've got it. Then the next video on another station from somebody who was there saying, where did they go? It's started back up. So I think besides looking at what kind of mitigation we can take in terms of, defensible space, 115-mile-an-hour wind, there's probably no defensible space except when it was a shed. If you had pumper trucks on site and it had been knocked down, with 115-mile-an-hour wind, you probably need an all-day approach to keeping that fire and making sure it didn't come back up and soaking that ground, because I believe there was no fire hydrant available. So is anybody looking at, the question is anybody looking at the approach to the fire situation in a high wind, which we get quite often?
Yeah,
I-
well,
I don't know the answer, sorry, Gary. I don't know the answer to that question. I think what we're trying to focus on today are the things that we can do through this one particular avenue in the land use code.
Okay, I'm sorry.
It's okay. Your
I
comments
thought,
are
I thought
are
you may be,
welcome.
I know they're doing a facilitated, what is it? Facilitated learning assessment right now. And I didn't, to look at what could have been done differently in the fire. And I thought your agency was possibly involved, along with mitigation should be, in my mind, the approach to what if you have a fire and a high wind, which we do get.
right, no, you're absolutely right. And I put my contact information in the chat. So I urge you to contact me, and I can connect you to that
Thank you.
evaluation.
I'm
You
sorry
bet.
if it was off track, but it
No,
seemed-
it's all right. It's an
it seemed
important
like a
point.
major component, because that is going to repeat again. We're going to have 100-mile-an-hour winds.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, Chris?
Yeah, question on creating defensible space. Boulder County, I'm not sure who does it, but there's the energy assessment, and that's been going on for decades, for the house. Is it possible to do a similar program for creating defensible space for fire and flood, maybe combined, where you would actually get an assessment that would tell the homeowners, you can do A, B, C, and these are the biggest defensible things, cut down the vegetation right next to your house and whatever, like a checklist? Is it possible to create a small program like that? Against fire and flood, not energy, just fire and flood, defense.
Yeah, we'll take that under consideration, Chris. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yep. All right, let's move on to the next section, Hannah.
Okay. So the Marshall Fire rebuilding approach that we are trying to create is one we think can be fast if we keep the set of issues that we look at pretty narrow, and we're able to establish clear parameters for modifications. It really is the idea for this to be a brief administrative staff review that accompanies the building permit. So again, something that a planner might be able to do once a building permit is in, sort of over the counter or by taking a few measurements. So in order to be fast, we think we should stick to minor or moderate changes between the old and new development. If we start sort of exceeding what can be considered minor or moderate, we really are needing to do more site-specific analysis and site visits, and those sorts of things are just really not, they're just not fast. And part of the minor and moderate changes between the old and new development constraint of this approach is that we need to develop an approach that provides predictability in the outcomes for the community. So this might be predictability for folks who still live in the burn area, whose homes weren't burnt, about what might happen in their community over the next 10, 15 years, 5 years, as folks rebuild for however long that takes. It also provides predictability for those of you who are rebuilding. There are many places in the burn area where multiple homes along a street may have been burned. And knowing where your neighbors might relocate their house and the extent of the changes that they might make allows you to think about what you want to do on your lot as well. We think once you have a rebuilding coordinator assigned to you, that prior to the building permit application, there would be an interactive design process that would include you, your design team, and your rebuilding coordinator, so that they can help give you guidance about how to meet whatever comes out of this process. And then you would submit your building permit, and that review would include all the building code and Marshall Fire rebuilding provisions would be reviewed at that point in time. And then you would be issued your building permit and move on to rebuilding your home. So as we think about what minor or moderate changes might occur, it helps us to know what did you appreciate about your neighborhood or your home that you hope redevelopment will not change. And if you have concerns about how redevelopment might change things, what are those concerns? So again, this is a short answer question. It's kind of a free form response. You can answer either parts of these questions, but really we're just trying to understand what it is that you might be interested in preserving as people rebuild.
So we'll give you several minutes to take your time to answer this. So it's 6:56 right now, so we'll check in with you at 7.
Acreage instead of acreage.
Turn my camera off. No.
You want me to fix your update?
In a bit, yeah.
I'm gonna fix something for Ally and myself.
With large setbacks.
Again, this is Rick Hackett, staff. If you've asked a question and you're not muted, I will mute you now. Just wanted to let the folks know who had already asked your question. I muted them temporarily. If you have other questions, you can ask them again. You can unmute if you have another question coming up. And again, this is Rick Hackett, staff. If you don't see the poll question, you can answer it in the chat. The question is, what did you appreciate about your neighborhood or home that you hope redevelopment will not change? What concerns you the most about how redevelopment could change things? And you can enter that answer in the chat if you don't see the poll question. This is Rick Hackett, staff. And also, if you don't want to use the chat or the poll and you have a quick comment that you want to let us know, raise your hand and we can let you speak about what you liked and what your concerns are about redevelopment. And Bruce and Stephen, I see your hands are still raised. If you have a comment for this, you can let us know now. Otherwise, I can lower your hand if you have a question when you want to ask later. And as Gary Sanfason said, we'll wrap this poll up at 7. So a few more seconds here and we'll end this. And then I will try to share the results again, like I did last time, since these won't be displayed for everyone, like the multiple choice or single choice questions.
Yeah, this is Steve Lichty again, and I think a lot of the properties in Boulder, unincorporated Boulder County, were on acreage. We all live quite a ways from each other, and I think we all need to have latitude to make minor changes in our square footage, our footprint, and height, and so forth. So that we, because a lot of us don't have the architectural plans that we were built with, or maybe we didn't like things about our house. Maybe the master bedroom was up on the top floor and we wanted on the main level and things like that. So we need to have the latitude. And I don't think a lot of us have too big a concern if we're, making minor changes. That's just the way I kind of view our neighborhood anyway.
Thanks, Stephen. We're going to dive into all those topics here coming up.
Okay.
And this is Rick Hack staff again. I will post the responses to this question in the chat. I'll have to do it in sections since we have a lot of answers and I can't put them all at once, but I will start posting those now. We also have answers in the chat post and look at, and again, staff will be reviewing all of your answers in both the poll and the chat.
I think while you do that, we can probably move to the next slide though. Thank you. So again, part of the purpose of Article 19, again, as I mentioned, is to kind of create that third path that allows flexibility and modifications to the pre-existing structures, but without needing site plan review. So a more streamlined review that allows some flexibility to pre-existing structures within defined parameters so that outcomes provide some predictability to the community. So we do think changes in size, adjustment to location, a new home design or height are things that would be addressed through this Marshall Fire rebuilding approach. So again, we are curious about, how would you like your home to be different than it was? So that's what the first poll question is intended to get to that. So that if you don't know yet, you can answer that as well. You can list more than one way.
So again, we'll give you a couple minutes to answer this. It's 7:03, so let's give you at least 3 minutes, 4 minutes to jot down your thoughts. Again, they don't have to be something you fully thought out, just any ideas you have now. We know things will change, and that's okay. And if you can't see the poll, please, like you're already doing, answer in the chat. I would like my new home to be different than my previous home in the following ways. And Stephen, can you mute your computer? Thank you.
I don't know how to mute myself.
Okay, we'll mute you.
Bottom in the bottom left.
Oh, there we go. Thank you.
Yeah, it's still not muted, Stephen. Now you are. Thank you. Give you a couple more minutes. Okay. Thank you. Great. We're getting a great picture from folks who've contributed in the chat, what people are looking to achieve. That's very helpful. Thank you.
And Gary, this is Rick Hackett staff. I'll read some of these responses since what I can see gave me the whole question. But I'll just read some of the responses. I will post these in the chat. Some of the responses to I would like my new home to be different than previous home in the following ways include probably smaller, more appropriate for my uses, healthier and safer, better utilization of floor space and square footage, added square footage for us, 1,000 square feet, smaller, more modern design, same square footage, different location, single story versus multi-story, more bathrooms, more square footage, lower, mostly more one story and more energy efficient, a main floor master or ranch instead of a 2-story, more covered porches, master on a first floor, lower profile, changing the footprint, better suited to aging in place, rooftop access with an attached garage and vaulted ceilings, 1 story, 1 level, to be a ranch instead of a tri-level, add solar, rotate the footprint slightly and expand, add a couple hundred square feet of finished space, new freestanding garage. So we've got a lot of different answers here. There's also allow for an ADU, which is an accessory dwelling unit, larger garage, maybe larger, bigger, more square feet, higher extra garage, more or less the same. More solar, more ignition resistant, more energy efficient, updated design, more aging friendly with fewer staircases for a ranch design. So those are some of the answers. I will try to post all these in the chat. And again, staff will have all access to all of these after the meeting and as we move forward with the regulations. So back to you, Hannah.
Thanks, Rick. You know, we know that building a custom home or having a custom home built includes a lot of decisions, a lot of details, and for some folks, it may be more than they're interested in dealing with. So the next poll question is, if pre-approved master home plans were available to you, how interested would you be in using one of these plans for your new home? So this is rating your interest level from 1 to 5, with 1 being the lowest interest level and 5 being the highest interest level. We also think this option might be a way to trim some costs.
All right, let's take a look at that results, Rick. Thank you. Those
We
are,
also had a few answers in the chat.
thank you. That's very helpful. I think it's pretty clear interest there, or lack of interest, mixed interest.
Okay, I think we can move on to the next slide. So this has come up in the comments already. Size is always you know, a parameter that we deal with when building in Boulder County. We just want to be clear to express to you that property owners will be allowed to rebuild the same floor area that was legally existing on the property pre-fire. So just wanted to put that out there at first. And then as we think about what size increases could be allowed, and normally we think about size increases when we're drafting these approaches to rebuilding, because it's typically where size increases have the potential to have new impacts. If people are building smaller, that's typically less of an impact. So these types of regulations that we're drafting usually set a top limit rather than a floor. Site plan review, which was the second path that I talked about earlier that exists, is required prior to a building permit when residential floor area on a property exceeds the size that is presumed to be compatible with the defined neighborhood. And in this case, that's 125% of the median residential floor area for that neighborhood. Site plan review is also triggered when more than 1,000 square feet has been added to a property. So again, thinking about the Marshall Fire rebuilding approach as sort of a third path, we think it could allow increases in size up to the compatible size for the defined neighborhood. So I think here we have another stop for questions or feedback for some of those folks out there who asked about size, increases in size. Does this make sense to you?
See, Howard says it sounds right to him. Thank you, Howard. Anyone want to unmute and share a comment or thought? Different view? Same
I
view?
just wanted to be clear. You're saying you're dropping the restriction of 1,000 square feet and it only having size up to the compatible size for the neighborhood?
That is the concept we're considering at this point.
Okay. Sounds good to me.
Okay, well, maybe we can move on to the next slide. We know this is another big topic for folks because it can have impacts to, you know, if your neighbors are moving their house around, it can have impacts on perhaps your views. That was one of the things I caught in the question, in response to the question about what folks value about their neighborhood. We do think this approach could allow certain defined modifications to the location, but primarily that rebuilding and reusing the existing footprint provides predictability and helps minimize new impacts, and that any allowed location modification needs to be well defined. Again, if we're doing a brief staff review, it really needs to be, those parameters need to be clearly spelled out. That's for us. I think it also allows folks designing a home to know what to design to. And before we jump into the poll questions here, which you can read and might consider while I talk about this next piece. This is a section along Panorama Drive and Panorama Park. And I think it's a useful map to take a look at as we consider what might be appropriate for location changes. Along the north side of Panorama Drive, we can see all the homes on the north side of that road in this picture were destroyed by the fire. That's what the red dot on the map means. We can also see that those properties, the homes along that stretch, are all sort of located along the same topographic line. So they sit along the edge there at sort of an even level. So in this instance, small shifts downhill might make a big difference to a neighbor's view down the street. It also might make a difference in impacts to the property itself, how much additional earthwork or grading might be necessary in order to locate a house further down the hill. And thirdly, for those folks who live below on Spring Drive, if homes move closer to them, what impact does that have to those people and how they might rebuild or live in their properties going forward? I think we can also see in this that there are other ways when small shifts might be okay. You know, if you're providing more space between two homes, maybe shifting one direction or another. So our challenge is really to define a reasonable amount of modification that can be allowed through this review. So our first question is, what modifications to the footprint would you consider to be minor or moderate changes?
And this is Rick Hackett staff. If you have questions about this or want to give us your feedback verbally, you can unmute yourself or raise your hand and you can unmute yourself and give us that, or you can type it in the chat if you can't use the poll feature.
We have a hand up too, Jim, if you had comment, I think we can take that while folks are filling out the poll.
Are you talking to me, Hannah?
You have a hand raised.
Yeah, I guess I had it on the last time, but I didn't know how to unmute myself. So on the last questions, but I guess it's the modification. The modifications, if you're using basically the same hole in the ground, are you saying you can reorient the building in different directions, or do you have to use the same direction? Or is it just a hole in the ground that you're orienting yourself around?
The way this is thought of, you know, as I've been thinking about it and as I've been talking about it to others is, you know, the hole in the ground that's there, sort of, you can see in this map on the screen, the outline of the buildings would be the starting point for thinking about how things might be located. You know, if again, kind of looking along the north side of Panorama Drive, you can see how some of those homes are really angled on the lot. The views up there are gorgeous. And so I understand why someone might want to shift their house, you know, angle it a little bit more than it is, or move it one way or the other on a lot. So those are the things that I'm thinking folks might want to do, and how we write that into the code is maybe a shift in one direction or another, or an allowed expansion of that footprint. We do have a question coming up on that.
Hannah, I got another question. Are you going to orient towards the average size in the neighborhood more so than strictly what your house is allocated based on records?
So the residential floor area that we have on record is what we would use to establish your pre-home floor area.
Okay, what if we can prove that was wrong by the dimensions of the foundation? Will you take that into account also?
I have not considered that question before, but I'll write it down and consider it further.
I mean, we're looking at the house, and the basement is absurd. I mean, the foundation is much larger than the square footage of the basement. So, you know, so there's something wrong with our historical records.
Yeah, I do know that, you know, we know there are going to be inconsistencies in our information. Part of the reason that we have, will assign rebuilding coordinators is to help folks work through those individual questions.
Okay, all right. I don't want to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. It's a great question. I'm sure others will have, you know, find inconsistencies maybe in the data that we have. And this does come up through site plan review on occasion. But we'll work with the individuals to establish that correct number.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Let's keep moving, Hannah. We got a lot of really good feedback in the chat. Next poll.
Okay. Rick, what is the next poll?
Sorry, this is Rick Hackett. We have a lot of questions, a lot of answers to our last poll question, but we'll go to the next one. which is about what instances should modifications to location not be allowed. So I'll launch that one now. And while folks are answering, I can give a quick rundown of some of the previous answers to what modifications to the footprint would you consider to be minor or moderate changes. Some answers include minor is 20% or less, would not obstruct neighbors' views or access, increase of square footage by 15%, including replacing HVAC to the latest technology with solar panels, a 5% increase in square footage, slight change in square footage allowed, but different shapes of no concern at all, just enough to accommodate the move foundation due to the cutoff piers. So 3 to 5 feet, maybe. Don't have an idea at this time. Moving footprint location, okay. As long as you build on the same footprint and within the setbacks to neighboring property, you should be able to build back with square footage you had plus what you need. Extended to easements prior to fire, up to 30% of the original footprint. Rotate orientation of house 90 degrees to maximize view and move site higher up the hillside. And in giving more space and ADA allowances to the 3 bedrooms, we want to bump up to a 2nd story.
Thanks.
So there's some of the answers, and I'll put these in the chat as fast as I can.
Great, and thanks. Let's move on to the next poll question as well. So the next question is, how do you suggest we define the parameters for location modifications? Feet, percentage change?
Rick's loading the question.
And you can choose multiple answers on this if you want. Or is that right? Or is it just one?
You can choose multiple answers.
Okay.
There are a number of ways that we could measure this essentially. And this is a list of various options for measuring how things might be able to move on a property.
Let's take a couple minutes. Quickly go through this, give us some input.
Yes, Gary, I think you're moving us along because we're getting close to, time is almost 7:30. We do want to cover the rest of the presentation.
And Rick, while we're letting people respond, will we be able to post the results of these polls somehow so people can view them?
Yes, we can do that. We'll come up with a PDF of the poll questions by tomorrow. I can do that.
Great, thank you.
We can also maybe move to the next slide while people are still considering this question. Oh, but the poll is in the way. Okay, so we can't do that.
All right, let's wrap up, and we got a few more poll questions to go, so thank you.
Me too. Thanks, that's helpful. Okay, so in the last slide, we really talked about the location, where is the footprint? Where is the house being placed? It's sort of in that, looking at a map in a aerial view, kind of moving that little box around the footprint of the house around on the site and maybe turning it in different directions. The ideas that we need to think about in this slide are really sort of what comes out of the ground in that location. And the idea, again, behind this Marshall Fire Path is really to allow the flexibility to build something, that was a little different than what you had before. And I picked a couple pictures from the internet this morning to sort of show what rebuilding without parameters or without us thinking about this could have really different homes come out of the ground, and for us to consider what might be appropriate, in the aftermath of the Marshall Fire. I think in the picture on the left, presume if someone had a single family ranch, the picture immediately adjacent to the right might be something that's a really minor change. It's still a ranch. They've changed the roof lines. Maybe it's a tiny bit taller and reoriented the garage. And the next picture over, this takes those changes, I think, a step further where, again, maybe we have a different bottom floor, but now there's a second story that's been added to the middle of the home. So this one looks, the footprint's a little bigger and it's taller. And then the last picture is both of those things. We have a larger bottom story and we have an entire second story. So again, focusing our review on minor or moderate changes in height, floor plan, and roof line doesn't necessarily allow us to get to the picture all the way on the right. And again, just like with the location, our challenge here is to define the parameters around the degree to which the bulk of the structure can change. So the questions that we have here in the poll are really similar ideas and questions that we had about location. What do you think are acceptable changes? What changes would be too much and shouldn't be allowed under this streamlined review? And some thoughts about how you might suggest we define these parameters. So I don't know, Rick, if we can go to that first one. I think while folks are answering poll questions, if we have comments in the audience too, I see Chris has a hand up, Chris Singer.
No, I didn't have a question.
Okay.
All right, let's wrap up this question and go on to the next one. And if you didn't get a chance to finish the poll, you can put it in the chat. And some of you already started answering this question: in what instances should these types of changes not be allowed? Give you a couple minutes for this. Seeing a lot of the neighbor impact as a key issue to consider. Thank you. Okay, one more minute for this question. Great, thank you. Again, if you have more to add when the poll closes, please feel free to add to the chat. And then final poll question on this slide is, how do you suggest we define these parameters? Do you want to say a little bit more about that, Hannah?
Yes, especially now that the poll popped up, you can see there are options here. Again, as we try to review projects that come through the door, providing some parameters and clear measurements in those helps both you plan how to design the house and helps us do a quick review. So what I've put in here as things we could consider for language in Article 19 for the rebuilding path is perhaps we just allow changes in height by a certain number of feet. We could define the amount of new floor area that could be added to a second story. We could allow increases in height up to the maximum allowed by zoning, but only in a certain percentage of the structure. So it's not a full second story. These are, ideas I've considered or possibilities for how to define this. And so we're curious about what you think here would work. These are likely not the only possibilities.
So if you have other ideas, please put them in the chat, which I see people are already doing.
There was a comment where someone didn't pick because all the choices they didn't like any of the choices, and that's fine. Thanks for putting that comment in the chat. If you have suggestions, we'd also like to hear those.
Okay, we'll have one more minute to wrap this up. Oh, there it is. We wrapped it up. Very nice. Thank you for that input.
Yeah, and the outcome could be a combination of things as well. Thank you for helping us.
Next slide.
So the next steps for the Marshall Fire Rebuilding Path development is really to take the input we heard today, get a draft put into our kind of more regulatory format, which will be available March 9th, in preparation for a Planning Commission public hearing on March 16th. That is a public hearing. It is a way that you can continue to participate in the process and speak at that meeting to Planning Commission. Planning Commission will make a recommendation on these regulations at that March 16th meeting. And then they will move to the Board of County Commissioners for decision making. Again, that's a public hearing where public comment and input is taken. And we're anticipating these to be able to go to the Board of County Commissioners public hearing immediately after the Planning Commission public hearing. But there may be some need to push that out if there are sections of the proposal that need more investigation or evaluation. That is the timeline that we're working under right now. I think this might actually conclude my portion of tonight's presentation, Gary, but.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. That was very informative and detailed, and really appreciate your instructions and helping to understand this process and solicit so much great input. So we'll pass it on.
For participating.
Yeah. The next slide and the next speaker is Ron Flax, the Chief Building Official.
Hello. So I wanted to just take a moment to just talk a little bit about the building codes. So what Hannah was talking about was really part of the planning process, and that has to be sorted out before you can submit for a building permit. But hopefully we'll get you into a process where you're ready to start to prepare your permit documents. And I just wanted to briefly cover a couple of things here. The first off is that we are currently using the 2015 building codes. We've adopted them and they've been in force since January of 2016. So they're pretty well established. We've been using them quite successfully. We've worked out many of the kinks. So hopefully that'll make things a little bit more straightforward, a little bit easier for everybody by not having a major update to the building code at the same time as you're dealing with everything else. I do want to just point out a couple of items for those folks who maybe aren't working with a design team that has had a lot of direct experience working in Boulder County. So Boulder County has amended the energy code portion of the building code. We call that set conglomeration of codes, we call that Build Smart, and it's really just our local energy code. And it does behave a little bit differently than the standard building code or the standard energy code that maybe out-of-town architects or contractors or whoever is on your design team might be familiar with, or maybe they're from around town but just haven't done a lot of work in the unincorporated portion of Boulder County. So to that end, what I'm going to be putting together is a Build Smart specific workshop that really is going to be designed to help your design team really dig into some of the details of what this energy code is, what it isn't, and help you navigate that. If you have questions about building codes specifically, whether it's before or after that meeting, or whether it's about the energy code or some other aspect of the building code, there's the email there, building@bouldercounty.org. that email address is monitored by a team of code professionals that are really quite responsive. I do ask that if you send in questions, it's really helpful to include your the street address of the property in question and just the word Marshall Fire someplace in that subject line, because we are prioritizing questions and projects that are related to the rebuilding, so we can just make sure we don't miss those things, and we get you as responsive an answer as possible. So I'm not going to go into too much more detail about that. The details of the amendments are found on our websites, and there's some links here. And we're happy to help you with that. But I wanted to give some time now to Zach, and he's going to be talking a little bit about some of the resources that are available to help you with to build as energy efficient and sustainable of a home as possible.
Next slide, please. Good evening, everyone. I'm Zach Swank. I'm the Built Environment Coordinator for the Office of Sustainability, Climate Action, and Resilience. And I'm going to do just what Ron said I was going to do. Next slide. So I know that folks have been waiting to hear for a while now, what financial incentives might be available to support rebuilding a high-performance home. And I know that information is very timely, and sooner the better. Would have been nice to know it already. And please trust that those of us who are working on putting together this financial support, we understand that, and we're working as quickly as we can to pull things together to make the rebuilding process, and particularly rebuilding a high performance home, a little bit easier for you. But it also takes time to pull some of these things together. So we do appreciate your patience. I'm excited that we're expecting in the next couple of days an announcement from Excel on their incentives, a formal announcement from Excel. So I'm excited about that. I unfortunately can't share that tonight, but we're expecting it in the next couple of days. There's also state legislation that's in the works. Discussions of low-cost financing from the Colorado Clean Energy Fund, and many discussions with manufacturers, distributors, and installers on providing discounts. So I know you would like to have all that information today. Unfortunately, it's still all in the works, but we are working on it as quickly as we can. And I just want to acknowledge that these incentives that we're talking about putting together they're not going to cover a large underinsurance issue. Unfortunately, they're intended to support the decision to build a more high performance home. And unfortunately, we just can't ask, Excel Energy, for example, to cover a large underinsurance issue. So I want to call that out, that when the package comes together and everything comes together, that's sort of what we're working towards. And I know that others are working on the underinsurance issue. Next slide. For folks interested in meeting with builders, finding out more information about high performance homes, and just generally gathering more information, this Friday and this Saturday is the Boulder Valley Build Expo. We'll have county and municipal staff present. You can come say hi to me at the Energy Smart table. We'll be there both days, can answer questions about building a high performance home, building all electric. And I see the link is in the chat. Thank you. So please come attend the event. It should be really informative with a lot of great information. Next slide. For those who missed it, last week, there was the first of the sessions that the Colorado Green Building Guild hosted. The Colorado Green Building Guild is a local nonprofit that of energy efficiency and green building professionals. And they hosted a really excellent session. I have to say, I work in this, and I've heard it before, and I thought the quality of the session, the information provided, the feedback and engagement with the couple hundred people who attended was really good. So I'll put the link to the recording. It's available in both English and Spanish. I'll put the link to the recording in the chat. And there will be more sessions, which we will keep you posted on as they come. Next slide. And then my last slide for tonight is, if you have any questions about building a high performance home, please come see us at the Builder Expo. Otherwise, Rachel Bramblett is our energy advisor. She's been working with Energy Smart for over 6 years. You can reach her at the phone number and the email listed, and we would be happy to help answer any questions you have about Energy Star certification, building a passive house, building electrification, etc. So please do reach out, and we hope to see some of you at the Build Expo on Friday and Saturday. Thank you.
Thanks, Zach. Next slide. Cami, do you want to give us a real quickie?
Sure, I'll just take a 30 seconds, sort of maybe a minute max here. So we'll take your brain away from rebuilding for just a minute here. If you were on the session 2 weeks ago, you heard me talk about the Marshall Fire related transportation and transit resources webpage. So there's an image of it. I know they're going to share the links here in the chat for you too, but just wanted to share quickly for those of you who may have had to relocate or possibly lost vehicles or are just dealing with different transportation needs than you were before. This site will give you some of the discounted prices or resources that are out there that are available for all of you who have been impacted by the fire. And we're also releasing tonight, and we're going to share with you in the chat, a new transportation needs survey. This is going to help us understand where you all lived, where you all are living now, and how to best organize some of the resources that are available to help you all who may be dealing with different transportation needs while you're temporarily displaced. So I know another survey doesn't sound like a whole lot of fun, but if you have a few minutes to answer this 10-question survey, that would be great. And just like Zach mentioned, we will also be at the Green Build Expo this weekend on Friday and Saturday. So if you do have specific transportation questions, there will be transportation representatives at the rebuilding table with a lot of the other staff that you've been hearing about talking about rebuilding tonight. So we're here to help. And thank you for attending tonight.
Thanks, Cami. And why don't you send me that survey link as well, and I can send it. Cheryl, who's the kind of the communication guru for the unincorporated area, can put that out tomorrow to everyone to fill out as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So Kim, do you want to join me in this next slide here?
I sure do. Yeah, I'm coming. This is just a recap on what we've gone over tonight. Hi, everyone. I'm Kim Sanchez, Deputy Director at Community Planning and Permitting. Thank you all for the responses tonight. I think it's challenging to try to get input in this setting, and we've tried to do our best to get some of the questions that we have addressed from you through the polling exercise. So appreciate your patience and responses in that. I do think we were able to get a lot of really informative feedback tonight. And again, this is the beginning of a conversation that will continue to happen through the public process. So just to recap, as others said, the Boulder Valley Build Expo will be Friday and Saturday in Louisville. The address for that is at Ascent Community Church. That's at 550 McCaslin Boulevard in Louisville. And that address was just put into the chat. As Hannah mentioned, we do plan on having a draft of the Marshall Fire rebuilding provisions available for public review on March 9th. So we'll take all of the great feedback that we got tonight and put together a draft that can be inserted into the code that will be available for you to comment on and let us know what you think. Then those provisions will be reviewed publicly at hearings in front of the Planning Commission on March 16th, and then in front of the Board of County Commissioners on, sorry, that's supposed to say March 17th or April 5th. So again, all of this will be noticed, and we'll also make sure that it's communicated to the Marshall Fire listserv. Another plug for that, most of you are likely signed up for that, but if you haven't subscribed to Marshall Fire News, please visit the Marshall Fire Rebuilding webpage. And there's an orange button on there that allows you to subscribe to get emails on all of these meetings that we're holding, upcoming meetings, and things like the Planning Commission and Board of County Commissioners hearings. So you can stay up to date on news. All of the contact information is listed there, our emails. For right now, please email us with any rebuilding questions at marshallrebuilding@bouldercounty.org. Once the Article 19 provisions are adopted, then we will be able to assign rebuilding coordinators to each property owner. But until then, we can help you through the Marshall Rebuilding email. So we're already, getting a lot of questions from people about the specifics on their property. What is my legally existing floor area? What is the size that's presumed to be compatible for my neighborhood? Those kinds of things are what we can help you look into if you email us at marshallrebuilding@bouldercounty.org. Next slide, please. So the last thing that we wanted to announce, and Gary, feel free to jump in if you'd like, but Gary and Katie Arrington, who are recovery manager and assistant recovery manager, are both now offering office hours. So Gary is holding his on Monday afternoons virtually. So a setting like this where you can speak face-to-face over the computer. He's also available on Friday afternoons for in-person meetings at the St. Ambrose Episcopal Church in Boulder. Katie has appointments on Monday afternoons in person, and she's available virtually all day on Wednesdays. So if you have, more general topics, you can talk to them about just recovery in general. For the specific questions about your property, please feel free to contact us at that marshallrebuilding@bouldercounty.org email. To book appointments with Gary and Katie, you can schedule through the booking link that is listed on this slide. And all of these slides will be posted on the Marshall Fire webpage by Friday. So you can go through the slide deck. If you know people that weren't able to attend this meeting that may be interested in hearing the presentation, there will also be a video available for them. Next slide, please. So I think that concludes where we're at. We were hoping to have a little bit of time for questions and answers tonight, but we're bumping up against the 8 o'clock stop time, and to respect your time and all of the thought and response that you put into tonight's meeting, we'll go ahead and end. I think we answered many of the questions through the Q&A, and as I've mentioned, each time that we've met with you virtually, we are available to you. You can reach us through the email. We are happy to talk with you over the phone. And again, this is the beginning of a conversation that we plan on having with you to assist your rebuilding efforts. So thank you, everybody, for attending. And Gary, I'll let you close us out. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Kim. And again, thank everyone for participating and really providing excellent feedback and input about how you want to rebuild and recover This is something we do after every disaster. I think we're unique in this, in that we take the time to gather all this input to try to tailor make the regulations to fit your needs. I'm really proud of our staff. I want to thank all the presenters. I want to thank all the staff who are behind the scenes. Rick, who's just doing amazing behind the curtain Zoom management coordination. Anna and Michelle answering questions. I want to thank our interpreters, Elena and Marina. I want to thank the Unincorporated Boulder Committee, County Committee. If you don't know, there's residents, neighbors in every neighborhood in the unincorporated area who meet every Friday to be a voice for you. You're welcome to go to that meeting. It's at noon at the St. Ambrose Church. And also, I just want to finally thank Cheryl Gordon for her amazing commitment to help with communication. So again, thank you all for your time. This is not the end. As you saw on the schedule, there'll be opportunity to provide feedback before the Planning Commission, during the Planning Commission hearing, and at the County Commissioner hearings as well. So thank you very much. And again, we'll see you next week on Tuesday for the debris removal program update. Thanks and have a good night. Bye-bye.